What many feared is now here. The United States has banned foreigners from accessing the most advanced AI models, both within and outside its borders.
The U.S. government, citing national security authorities, has issued an export control directive to suspend all access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5 by any foreign national, whether inside or outside the United States, including foreign national Anthropic employees.
Europeans, Latin Americans, Asians, none of them can access Claude's most advanced models. And yes, it's highly probable this will be reversed, because the situation benefits neither Uncle Sam, nor Europe, nor, obviously, Anthropic. However, this episode has served to make one thing clear. The United States can cut off Europeans' access to AI whenever it wants. We saw it with the shipment of weapons to Ukraine, and now we're seeing it with an even more important issue that could define the economic future of Europe for decades to come. We all know that Europe doesn't have a Google, an Anthropic, or an Nvidia. There's a global race for AI, and Europe isn't just coming in last, it's not even participating. But hey, this doesn't have to be such a bad thing. Not everyone needs to innovate. The US can create Claude, and Europe can focus on helping its companies make the most out of it. Or at least that was the idea. But of course that requires access to the latest AI models, and we've already seen that this ultimately depends on what Donald Trump decides. And naturally, if the issue is sovereignty and strategic autonomy, and the only alternative is Chinese AI, well, what can I say? It's like being between a rock and a hard place. That said, Europe isn't entirely blameless in all of this either. Let me ask you a question. Do you know what open evidence is? I'm sure many of you are hearing this name for the first time, but it's a kind of ChatGPT specialized in medicine that 2 out of every 3 doctors in the US already use. In April of this year alone, it received 27 million queries, a true revolution in the sector. Now then, how many European doctors are using it? 0. Not a single one. Open evidence is effectively banned in Europe, and this isn't Donald Trump's fault, but the fault of the bureaucrats in Brussels. Mind you, it's not that this AI gives bad medical advice and has been banned. No, it's because the Artificial Intelligence Act is such a strict and absurd regulation that it seems straight out of a cartoon. And as we'll see in this video, the worst is yet to come. The fact is that Europe is getting left out of the party, and the economic and geopolitical consequences could be disastrous. Worst of all, there's no coherent plan. You don't want American or Chinese AI, fair enough, but then you must be doing everything possible to develop the European ChatGPT, your own continental champion, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. Why Europe has fallen behind in this race, what it's doing to change that, and whether it can truly achieve genuine strategic sovereignty. But first, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, I've got some news for you. At Visual Factory, we have created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education, the ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you'll learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain in a clear and simple way the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS, you get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better, since we send each episode of the series by email and every edition is unique. If you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them and you won't be able to access them later. But with that said, let's get into the video. The United States accounts for 70% of all global computing power. Europe accounts for around 5%. That's what happens when electricity is 2 to 3 times more expensive. But let's not go there. The point is that the gap with the US isn't just about computing power, it's also about the quality of the models. Uncle Sam has Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, and even models that tend to lag a bit behind, but still stand out for something special like Meta's Llama or Grok. Europe, on the other hand, has only one flagship player, a single lifeline if Trump refuses to share his technology, and if Europe doesn't want to depend on China. We're talking about Mistral, a French startup with a goal that goes beyond simply being the European ChatGPT. Over the past year, Mistral has increased its revenue 20-fold, all with the promise of offering the complete sovereignty package. It aims to vertically integrate the design of new models, the construction of data centers to train them, and the infrastructure to run them in the cloud. What's more, they aren't content with just developing cutting-edge AI models. They also want to incorporate them into tools that businesses can use without any hassle, just like Anthropic does. It all sounds wonderful, and the startup is growing at breakneck speed. There's just one tiny problem. It's still ridiculously small. It has increased its revenue 20-fold in a year, yes, but it's only gone from $20 million to $400 million. Starting from such a small base, it's not so difficult to achieve multiples like that. But that's not the worst part. Over its entire history, Mistral has raised between $3 and $4 billion in funding rounds. OpenAI, in its latest round alone, raised $122 billion. And so the French startup is valued at around $15 billion, while OpenAI and Anthropic are valued at over $1 trillion. Mistral is ridiculously small, and it has yet another problem. Listen to what its CEO has to say.
We will continue to invest in this area, given the surging and sustained demand from governments, enterprises, and research institutions seeking to build their own customized AI environment, rather than depend on third-party cloud providers.
Have you noticed the order in which he mentions his clients? First, governments, then businesses. The fact is, no matter how much Mistral says it wants to compete in the big leagues, its business model is clear: to be Europe's second choice when it doesn't want to depend on the United States or China. In other words, a large part of its $15 billion valuation isn't due to being a good AI company, but to being a European company. Mind you, we're not saying it's a bad company. Frankly, Mistral has done quite well. The problem is that its competition is in a different league. The question is, why? Why do European startups refuse to scale up? The answer, VisualEconomik community, is twofold: regulation and money. Europe is a regulatory superpower. We are not the ones saying this. It was said by the very same Brussels bureaucrats who drafted the AI Act, boasting that it's the strictest artificial intelligence regulation in the world. One rather amusing thing about this regulation is that any model trained with more than 10 to the 25th power flops is automatically classified as a high-risk model. And GPT-4 has already broken that barrier, meaning that any cutting-edge model is automatically a high-risk model. But there are also high-risk uses, which include anything related to education, healthcare, law, hiring employees, government services, industrial machinery, vehicles, the manufacture of medical devices, and toys. Don't ask us why toys fall into this category. So what does all this mean? Well, suppose Mistral wants to release a state-of-the-art model to tutor students with the lowest grades, which is supposedly one of the things it aims to do. There are about 14 steps, each with its own paperwork, deadlines, and a fine of between 3% and 7% of your global revenue if you make a mistake on any one of them. And I'm sorry, but we're not going to read through them because we won't be finished until tomorrow, if we're lucky. But basically everything this AI does has to come with its own impact assessment. It has to be supervised by one or sometimes even two humans, and on top of that, user data has to be stored in the most expensive and cumbersome way possible. Remember that thanks to the GDPR, that European law that forces you to accept cookies every time you open any website, storing data in Europe is already 20% more expensive than in the US. It's a very expensive and very slow process in an industry that reinvents itself almost every month with new cutting-edge models. Who can afford all this? Well, giants like Google, Microsoft, or OpenAI. But for small startups, it's as if they have to learn to ride a bike without training wheels on, while on a tightrope between two skyscrapers. And we haven't even mentioned the elephant in the room yet: copyright. Let's hear again from Mistral's CEO.
European AI developers, by contrast, operate in a fragmented legal environment that puts them at a competitive disadvantage. The current opt-out framework, designed to allow rights holders to protect their content and prevent AI companies from using it for training if they so choose, has proven unworkable in practice.
Copyright is a highly controversial issue, but one thing is clear: current legislation does not protect European authors, because American and Chinese companies train their models using their work, and yet it's a huge burden burden for Europe. In the US, this has been settled with a fine. If an AI has used pirated content and the author files a complaint, the company will most likely have to pay about $5,000, and everyone is happy. But in Europe, a complaint of this kind can bring AI development to a standstill. And even without a trial, regulations require that the material used for training be very carefully classified, which is already very expensive in and of itself. However you feel about this, the consequences are undeniable. And do you know what's worst of all? That despite what we've told you, the AI Act is a very incomplete law, written in a rush. The law is ambiguous, sometimes directly contradicts other laws, and has many loopholes that will have to be filled by other laws that don't even exist yet. It's estimated that for the AI Act to be complete, between 60 and 70 additional regulations would still need to be approved, with all the uncertainty that this entails. I'm sure you now understand why open evidence isn't available in Europe, or why Mistral is having such a hard time growing. Of course, there's another reason we can't overlook. Have you heard of companies like Silo AI or FluidStack? They are two European startups with a lot of potential, but the first was acquired by AMD, and the second moved its headquarters from London to the US. I don't think this will come as any surprise, but when European startups start to show signs of growth, the first thing they do is flee to America. 1 in 10 European startups with more than $100 million in funding moves to the United States, while only 1 in 100 moves from Silicon Valley to Europe. What's more, something very shocking happens here. The more funding a European company raises, the more likely it is to leave. But in the case of US startups, this is completely irrelevant. So it's most likely that many of these companies are relocating because their customers are European or due to personal circumstances. But do you know what's most interesting about this whole issue? That when a European startup moves to Silicon Valley, it starts losing more money, about 5 million less in net revenue each year for an entire decade. And that's not all. Neither the likelihood of going public through an IPO, nor the success of those IPOs increases. At first glance, it looks as though these companies become worse businesses, but the reality is exactly the opposite. In the US, startups have access to so much funding that they can afford to operate at a loss for a decade. This allows them to focus on long-term innovation, and it shows. For example, the number of patents they file doubles. This is crucial for AI, because companies like Anthropic or OpenAI are true money-burning machines. We've already discussed this topic in depth in another video, but in short, each AI model could be profitable on its own, but because there's so much competition, they become obsolete very quickly. As a result, all profits go towards developing new, more advanced models. A European company, on the other hand, cannot stay in the red for that long, not if it has to keep competing against the other giants in the industry. Hence, Europe's solution has been subsidies and protectionism.
The EU launches the Invest AI initiative to mobilize 200 billion euros in investment in artificial intelligence. This unique public-private partnership, similar to a CERN for AI, will enable all our scientists and companies, not just the largest ones, to develop the most advanced, large-scale models needed to make Europe a continent of AI.
The solutions to the main problem, the lack of a unified capital market, remain buried at the bottom of a drawer in the darkest, most inhospitable office in Brussels. And to compensate for that, Europe has opted to provide funding and ensure that public contracts go to European companies, even if, objectively speaking, they provide a worse service at a higher price. But the worst part is that, since all member countries must agree, and each country wants what's best for itself, in the end, these packages amount to nothing. 200 billion euros is already very little money in and of itself. These funds are intended to last for about a decade, and that figure is what Amazon alone is going to spend on data centers this year. On top of that, it will allocate 20 billion to 4 or 5 data centers. Not even this is clear, meaning 4 or 5 billion per center. What does the EU hope to achieve with this? If you're going to bet everything on throwing money at the problem, instead of solving your structural issues, at least make a smart bet. Because with this funding, a data center wouldn't even have enough to buy a bag of sunflower seeds. In short, Europe's digital future looks pretty bleak. This ban on Fable and Mythos 5 is just a passing episode, but it strikes directly at Europe's main vulnerability and serves as a warning to others. It's clear there was never going to be a European Anthropic. That ship has already sailed, but at least the old continent could be a pioneer in putting AI to real use. Now, it's not even clear whether we'll be able to access cutting-edge technology, and as for the Europeans themselves, themselves, well, what can I say? They are light years behind the competition. In any case, now that we've gotten this far, it's your turn. What do you think is the main reason there isn't a European ChatGPT? Will we see a startup like Mistral also surpass the $1 trillion mark? What do you think Europe should do? You can leave your answers down in the comments. And if you really want to understand what's happening in the markets and learn how to manage your money with more confidence, join the Visual Factory Club. It's completely free and the link's in the description. As always, don't forget that here on VisualEconomik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss any of our updates. Take care. I'll see you next time.